So did y'all see that bus run right over me? Good gosh. Will you pray with me? Oh, holy and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation on all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you, O God, you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So last week we got started on our focus on the letter of James. And we noted that James was likely writing to the first century, first generation of Jesus followers. And that he was writing what it was that he perceived to be true about the people. In other words, James was spending a lot of time watching what the people were doing. He was listening to what they said, and then he turned around and he shared his opinion about how he was interpreting all of that. Now, whether he was right in his assessment of those he was observing or not is really not something you and I can determine. We weren't there. And, if we're watching other people and making those kind of assessments, we might be right and we might not. But he's got opinions, and they're all through this letter. But even so, you and I, as followers of Jesus many generations later, also struggle with what we see as the gap between what people say and what we see people do. And much has been written and noted about this perceived hypocrisy within the capital C church, especially over the past couple of decades. These observations and our experiences of that have given rise to a group of people called the nones. Now that's spelled Nones. It's people who, when asked, what is your religious preference, say none. Okay? Not to be confused with those N-U-Ns. Now, in this second chapter of the letter, James starts with what's really kind of a comical story about the people in a church or an assembly, as it's translated, who obviously are showing favoritism to someone who appears to be rich while they snub another who appears to be poor. And after he tells this story, James invites us to recall what he refers to as the royal law. And this royal law is laid out in Leviticus 19 and summed up in the commandment that Jesus reiterates to us as the greatest commandment. I'm going to guess that y'all know this. It is to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And it's that last half of the commandment that James seems to be pretty focused on. And so with this in mind, James shares his insights on faith and works, as we heard earlier. And I got to tell you, it was these insights that absolutely irritated Martin Luther to no end. He was that reformer of the 16th century, founder of what would later become known as the Lutheran branch of the Protestant movement. And he interpreted James to be speaking in opposition to the words of Paul, where Paul spoke about us being saved by faith alone. And while Luther influenced a great deal of scholarship, there has since been a renewed resurgence around the teachings of James in the last century. And so for all that Luther dissed James, we do find ourselves now going back to James and reading in there some things that are actually pretty helpful for you and I to consider. James is concerned with the gap that he sees between what people say and what people do. He explains as we continue in the letter, he says, "But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith.'" Now, I have a confession to make to you. I have not unpacked all of my boxes yet, especially the boxes that are marked office. But I did go on a hunt this week for a box that held a particular item. You see, over the years, I have collected a large assortment of books and wall hangings and crosses and things. I have lots of things in these boxes. I can't even tell you what some of these things are. And some of them I've bought, but many of them have been gifts. This one was one that I purchased. And I'm going to tell you the story about it. So when I was going through the ordination process, we were required to attend something called licensing school. Now, we still do this for our candidates for ministry, but it was different when I went through it. We literally went to a Catholic retreat center for an entire week to learn together all that we needed to know in order to be good Methodist clergy. And at this Catholic retreat center in Fort Worth, there was a gift shop. And I think it was open for 5 minutes one of the 5 days that we were there. And so, we all scramble into the gift shop, and I see this hanging on the wall. This is probably something that you've heard before, and I understand if you can't see it very well. But what it says is, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. And then under it, it says St. Francis of Assisi. And then it's signed down here, Sister somebody. I can't read what it's signed, but one of the nuns had prepared this. And so this was hanging on the wall in the gift shop, and I thought, oh, how cool is that? I need that. What a wonderful thing that is. What a great and fabulous statement. Can y'all see that okay? Hopefully it won't fall. And so I purchased it. And it was sometime later, at some point during my years of seminary, that I finally learned, first of all, that St. Francis never really said that. We've quoted it as being something that St. Francis had said, but he really hadn't said that. So I went back to go do some research to try to jog my memory on what it was that St. Francis said and why we think he said that. And I came across a blog, and I want to share with you what he tells us. He says the slogan is actually an apparent misquote of what Francis said in a book that he wrote in the year 1221. Now, St. Francis founded the Franciscan order, and he wrote a book called Rules of the Friar. And chapter 17 refers to preachers. And so I will quote what was shared from that book. Let none of the brothers, now this is the year 1200, so it's all brothers. Hang in there. Let none of the brothers preach contrary to the form and institution of the Holy Roman Church. And unless this has been conceded to him by his minister, but let the minister take care that he does not grant this leave indiscreetly to anyone. Nevertheless, let all the brothers preach by their works. And let no minister or preacher appropriate to himself the ministry of brothers or the office of preaching, but let him give up his office without any contradiction at whatever hour it may be enjoined him, and on and on and on. The guy says what St. Francis told his friars was not to preach unless they'd received proper permission to do so, and that even if they didn't get to preach, he wanted to make sure that all the brothers preached with their works. He goes on to say, I don't post this to defend St. Francis and his theology, and he admits I've never read anything he's ever said except some of his bird sermons, because he was the bird, remember? He's always pictured with the bird. I do know, however, that somewhere along the line, someone stretched what he said into something Jesus and the scriptures never say. We must preach the gospel at all times. And to do that, we must use our words. We can't just preach by our deeds. That's like saying, feed hungry people, use food if necessary. In that last bit, I think this author and James are in agreement. In fact, James is deeply concerned about caring for the needs of the people, and he sees the connection between that work and our faith in God through Christ as being completely inseparable. You can't do one without the other. And I don't think James is just talking about tending to hungry or naked people. I think in his in-your-face kind of way, James is inviting us to allow our faith to enliven our actions, our behaviors, the things that we do. I remember one year, not that terribly long ago, when I was standing in the sanctuary at a previous church, and we were preparing for the Ash Wednesday service that would be held that evening. And we were all gathered in there, and we were working to make sure that we had everything just where it was supposed to be, and everybody knew that was leading worship, knew where they were supposed to sit, what they were supposed to say, when they were supposed to get up. You know, we worked through all of this. This is all very important things that we were doing. And as we were starting to wrap up, I noticed that the very far right back door to the sanctuary opened, and a woman quietly walked in and took a seat towards the back of the church. And so we finished up, and I walked over to say hello and to check in on her. And she shared with me she simply wanted to come in and sit. She just needed to be in that space. If you've ever walked into this space when it's not occupied, there's just something really powerful about sitting in the sanctuary. And so she was curious about some of the things that she'd seen us do, and as we were getting ready for that service tonight. So I sat down and I told her about the upcoming Ash Wednesday service, and then she asked a few other questions, and then I started to ask some questions. We just had a conversation, and she finally started to share a little of her story with me. She was a nurse, or had been, and she was trying really hard to live on her disability income. She shared a house with roommates. There were challenges, as any of us would experience as well. So we just sat and we talked, maybe 30 minutes or so. She did not ask me for anything. Now, she and I did pray together, and it wasn't just that I prayed for her. She also prayed for me. And as she was getting ready to leave, she handed me one of our church envelopes. And about that time, I reached over and got a fresh envelope and one of those, we had those little tiny pencils, a pencil, and I wrote down my cell phone number to give to her. I also invited her to the Ash Wednesday service. I did not see her that night. And I will confess to you that I did open the envelope before I put it in our safe. Inside were a couple of worn dollar bills, not much, and yet I knew how much it was because of the story that she had shared with me. Now, a couple of weeks went by, and I got a text from her. And just randomly, she said, "Do you like Coca-Cola cake?" And I'm like, "I don't know what Coca-Cola cake is." I said, "I don't know. I've never had it." The next week, she showed up at the church and dropped off a Coca-Cola cake for me. I got to tell you, both of us seemed to have sufficient clothing. And neither of us had really expressed that we were hungry. And even so, I will tell you that there was plenty of faith working between us. She absolutely humbled me. My guess is she would say that it was nice that I took the time to sit down and listen to her, to show interest in her. But from my perspective, Jesus had shown up in her. She was giving what she had because she simply wanted to share. Her actions, her attitudes were for me what it means to show your faith through your works. You see, the thing is, you and I are all very deeply human. I'm not sure James had much patience for that part of us that messes up, right? that gets caught up in our own stuff, sometimes misses out on caring for the people around us or even seeing the people around us. But we all do this at times, don't we? I know I do. We get caught up in our own needs. And then someone will reach out to me. They'll check in on me. They'll say something affirming or kind or hopeful, and I am just overwhelmed with gratitude. Reminded of who I belong to. Reminded that I am a beloved child of God, and it shakes me out of my stuckness. That's faith at work. I'm late to the game. I just finished watching Ted Lasso. Any Ted Lasso fans? No judgment here, okay? I waited till the kids were gone. Come on. In the finale, one of the characters is kind of lamenting. They've been trying to make changes in who they are and how they're perceived, and they're trying to be better. And this other character says to him, human beings are never going to be perfect, Roy. The best we can do is to keep asking for help and accepting it when you can. And if you keep on doing that, you'll always be moving towards better. Reaching out, encouraging, sharing, that's faith at work. We do that for each other, and I got to tell you, it matters. I dare say that kind of work matters every bit as much as feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. Whether I need food or clothing or just a reminder that I'm enough, all of that is an expression of God's love. It is all faith at work. Like James says, faith works for all of us, in all of us, through all of us. Thanks be to God. Amen.